What if I told you that there are some people out there that believe that college athletics is just a springboard to bigger things? But for others, and for many others, what if I also told you that for college athletics, that is the pinnacle? And you already know what we about to talk about. We're not even going to worry about an intro because we saw what happened with inserter analysts. I'm not going to even like worry about it. This is the tweet that many people have been talking about. This take right here is objectively a garbage take. And he had respectfully, he gave his opinion. Everyone is entitled to your opinion. It's like buttholes. Everyone has one. And what ended up happening was, basically Caleb Williams shouldn't even worry about the regular season anymore because USC is out of the college football playoff. What happened to being a leader? What happened to going out and trying to, play with your teammates one last time? Because Caleb Williams is going to go to the NFL most likely. There's not really a question about it. But what happened to being a competitor? And as someone that actually was a college athlete, I didn't compete in college football. I was a collegiate athlete in the sense of cross country and track and field. For most people, getting to the college level, that is the pinnacle. I'm looking at a stat in front of me right now. It's the percentage of high school athletes that get to play in college sports. Little over 7% of high school athletes in America get the opportunity to play a varsity sport at the college level. Now, I'm not even talking about going Division One that many of us watch and enjoy on Saturdays and watch and enjoy through the winter, in the spring, sometimes like in the summer with college baseball specifically. I'm just talking about college athletics as a whole. If you want to talk about Division One, that's less than 2% of high school athletes. 1 in 57 high school athletes, to be precise, they end up going to play and compete at the college level, specifically in NCAA Division One. Not even talking about FBS, not even talking about FCS. It is a high level that's required to play in college athletics. And yet, for some that cover this sport, as we saw from this tweet, this horrendous tweet, it's not seen as the pinnacle. It's just seen as a springboard. It's seen as, just another business, another like stepping stone towards professional athletics. So I had to get that out of the way because I was deeply disturbed by it. And I know that many of you were disturbed by it as well. So yeah, with that, I promise you we're gonna have a more exciting, we're gonna have a more upbeat show later tonight. But as someone that was a former college athlete, I had to get off my chest real quick. So I appreciate you guys getting through my stumbling. We do have a great podcast here tonight. First of two pods that we do have planned for this week. We got a lot happening in this show here tonight. So I appreciate you tuning in. We're gonna have a good time other than that horrendous cheat from Ocho that I saw on Twitter the other day. Really excited as we are starting to really dig our heels into the second half of the season. Pretenders and contenders are really starting to show themselves right now. Are we seeing some teams that got to a really strong start, but maybe are truly fraudulent? We're getting to that point. We're starting to get the answers to the questions that we've been asking for, some for several months now. Some for several months, right? But with that being said, very excited about this Any Given Saturday pod here tonight as we jump in on a crisp night down here in Dayton, Ohio. This is the peak Midwestern weather, the peak fall weather, as some would say. We're really excited about that in particular. I got game recaps for tonight. Maybe not the most high-profile games, but the games that certainly surprised me the most over the course of this weekend. We'll dive into both the Power 5 and the Group of 5 for that, because there were certainly some surprises on both sides of the aisle over the course of the college football weekend. We have a new Any Given Saturday top 25 that is going to be released tonight. It's actually going to be released very shortly, so stay tuned for that to see who I would have in my top 25 if these teams are playing on a neutral field. I'll explain that more in a minute. And of course, we're going to wrap things up. We will wrap things up here tonight. I got a best bet for you guys. I have a best bet for maybe not necessarily for Saturday itself, but, you know, some of these midweek games that, you know, maybe you should be keeping an eye on. And I think there might be some easier money to be earned here tonight. And I think it's important that you lock this in before people catch on to what's about to happen. So let's go ahead and dive right into it here tonight. Welcome to Any Given Saturday. Anything can happen on any given Saturday. As those teams that are favored by 30 plus, 20 plus, and either found themselves on the losing end or were very close to losing. I mean, that's just a beautiful thing about Saturdays in college football. It's just the passion and the volatility that creates that excitement for college football season. We got to always remember that. As the most important thing, just the traditions and the passions. We can never get away from those things. I think that's precious, extremely precious for our sport. So that being said, we are more than halfway through the season out. We saw week 8 recently completed. As I'm recording this podcast right now, it's Tuesday night on October 24th. 2023. Right now, we have the first week 9 games that are kicking off. New Mexico State, Louisiana Tech, Liberty, and Western Kentucky. Hopefully, you guys are watching this game or maybe having it tabbed onto a separate screen. That has some big implications in Conference USA. Winner of that game is going to have the inside track, by the way, of going and hosting the Conference USA Championship at the end of the year. So that's a big game from that conference perspective. Now, that out of the way, now that we're here in week number 9, and it's starting up as we speak, I do have a brand new top 25 for you guys. Now, this is as of yesterday. It is not going to take into account any of the games that are happening right now as we speak. This is as of the completion of the week 8 games that were completed on Saturday, October 21st. Now, before I show you guys these rankings, here is a little bit of a disclaimer for you guys, right? These are not how I would rank these teams. This is not how I would do it. If you want to see how I would personally rank these teams, let me know down in that comment section. I would certainly consider doing that as we get closer to having our very first college football playoff rankings being released. In the meantime, though, what these rankings are, these are power ratings. And what these power ratings represent is, as of today, who would be favored over whom on a neutral site field, and that's based on their body of work completed over the course of the season. We don't necessarily project too much into the future with these teams. Or at least we try our best not to project too terribly much. We base it off of what have you done over the course of this season, and we go based off of that. And it's also expectation based. So winning by 24 when you are only a 10-point favorite, for example, is going to help you more and give you more of a boost in these power ratings than, let's say, you were that 24-point favorite, but you only end up winning by 12, winning by 14. One, the former helps you, the latter is going to hurt you a little bit in these power ratings. It's essentially expectation based. So, disclaimer out of the way, we actually do not have any new teams enter this top 25. And this is the first time that we had this happen so far this year. So I think we're starting to see a little bit more of a clear-cut top 25. But we still see a little bit of movement here. We're going to start from the bottom, as Drake would say, and then we will work our way up to the top and reveal that number 1 ranking last. We'll start from the bottom, though, 21 through 25. Here's what those teams are ranked as of tonight. Now, we've had Miami ranked in this top 25 the entire time, even after they lose 2 games in a row to Georgia Tech and North Carolina. And even after those 2 losses, yeah, that home game against Clemson. And the model, surprisingly enough, the model actually had believed that the wrong team was favored. Clemson was favored by Vegas. The model believed that Miami actually should have been favored. And it turns out the model was right. We saw Miami win 28-20 in overtime, but they found a way to win. So we've had Miami rated ahead of Clemson, or at least very similarly. Now Miami's ahead of Clemson. Iowa's at 25, ugly loss, but we still love their defense. We really like what they were doing defensively. One of the best defenses in the country. Just their offense is just insanely inconsistent, if it even is existent at all. And then rounding out this up, these first 5, Texas A&M at 22. Arizona, who was on bye this week, is at number 21. They did move down slightly in the rankings, but there was no change of our power rating system. I don't change a power rating of a team that was on bye because we don't have any new information to really work off of. Okay, so we got that out of the way first and foremost. Now, we're going to work our way up. We're going to now jump into the top 20. We got a little bit more notable changes here in this top 20. 2 teams in particular, North Carolina. This time last week, I had North Carolina in my top 10, but North Carolina had an extremely egregious loss to Virginia. They were a 24-point favorite. They found a way to lose to a team who, were pulling for Virginia after what happened to their program tragically at the end of last season. But Virginia was also a team that didn't have an FBS win all year. And I mean, Virginia was going to get one eventually. Did not think it was going to happen to this North Carolina game. This is the type of game that keeps you out of the college football playoff at the end of the year. I remember when Ohio State took on Purdue, and Ohio State was shocked by Purdue back in 2018. It was the only loss that Ohio State had, but that loss was so egregiously bad, it ultimately kept them out of the top 5, even though they still ended up winning the Big Ten that year. So that team was led by the late Dwayne Haskins. Prayers up to the Haskins family still. Rest in peace to a guy that I really liked to watch in college. But this North Carolina team, inexcusable loss. This was a bad loss. So we had to move them down, and we moved them down significantly. We still think they're a top 25 worthy team, but down 8 spots in number 8, they had the biggest fall within this top 25 of this week. UCLA, on the other hand, UCLA playing some solid ball. We actually did move them in the opposite direction of UCLA, or not of UCLA, of God, who we were just talking about? We're North Carolina. We moved them in the opposite direction of North Carolina. UCLA taking on Stanford on the road, and I mean UCLA handles their business. Nothing too crazy here. 42-7 win over Stanford. Really good win. That's how you close a team out. Colorado, I'm looking at you. Because unlike Colorado, UCLA, when they had a free score lead, did not give it up in the second half. Actually, they expanded their lead in the second half. So shout out to UCLA just for maintaining the focus here, as we'll see UCLA. They're up 5 spots, and they move up to number 17 in the entire country. Now, we'll move into the top 15 yet. And here in this top 15, biggest notable change that we have, it's Texas. Texas, we had ranked number 8 in the country at the FBS level. We did move them down 5 spots. It was a pretty significant drop for really a couple of reasons, right? First and foremost, you were supposed to blow out Houston, and not only did they fail to blow out Houston, Texas was very close to losing this game. extraordinarily close to losing this particular game. 1 point. This was a game, actually, 2 separate times it was tied in the second half. It was tied as as late as 7:43 left to play in the fourth quarter. Texas is very fortunate to come out on top. They're still have all of their goals in front of them. Big 12 championship, possibly an appearance into the college football playoff. But it does lead into my second reason. Quinn Ewers did end up getting hurt in this game. It is a shoulder injury. This shoulder injury is a AC joint sprain. It's grade 2. And it was discovered actually it was discovered yesterday. We're going to see how good this Texas quarterback room really is. Redshirt freshman Malik Murphy is going to presume to be the starter. He won the backup job in the spring. Is this a time as well, though? Do we get to see an Arch Manning? He was the number 5 overall recruit in the 2023 ESPN class. I don't think Arch Manning should start by any means, but if it's a blowout or, Malik Murphy ends up struggling for whatever reason, do we get to see a peak of Arch Manning, related obviously to Peyton and Eli and arguably one of the best football families in America, really a football royalty. So an interesting question there for sure. I'm really curious with how that develops as we see Quinn Ewers deal with that injury. But in the meantime, Texas is down 5 spots. They're at number 13 in the country for me. Okay, so we have the top 10 coming up, and this is going to be an extremely hot take. I'm warning you guys right now. I'm going to show you this list from 10 to 6, and I already know where you guys are looking at. Kansas State, up 11 spots. We're going to talk about Kansas State more in depth here in a little bit, because a little bit of spoiler for you guys. This was a team that really surprised me in a pleasant way over the course of last football's weekend. But this is a Kansas State team. I think they found a spark a couple of weeks ago, and all of a sudden, Kansas State's that's a team that I don't know if there's a lot of teams out there that are like, yeah, I want to play Kansas State right now. This team is coming in red hot. They also do get to avoid Oklahoma as well. They don't have to worry about the Sooners. They do play Texas in a couple of weeks as well. Texas without its starting quarterback. Can Kansas State find its way back into the Big 12 championship? They're certainly playing extremely high-level ball ever since that loss to Oklahoma State. And listen, Kansas State does have a couple of losses on this resume right now, but one of them was a last-second field goal to the Missouri Tigers. They had to hit a 60-yard field goal, by the way, in order for that to actually hit. And then you got Oklahoma State on the road. Oklahoma State playing good ball too. Honestly, Oklahoma State probably should be ranked in the top 25. Maybe they'll prove that over this week, but this goes to show Kansas State an extremely good football team. And I think they're criminally underrated by the AP poll. I think they're criminally underrated by the coaches poll. They're probably going to be criminally overrated or underrated when we do start to see those college football playoff top 25 rankings start being produced. I believe this time next week is when the first one comes out. Bless up. You love to see it, by the way. So we're very curious to see how Kansas State handles these next few games. But keep an eye on the Wildcats. I think they're going to sneak up on a lot of people as we get into the tail end of this football season, as we get into November. Because beyond that Texas game, this schedule is very navigatable for Kansas State. And I could see them approaching 10 wins by the time the dust completely settles here at the end of the regular season. And finally, we do have the top 5, rounding out the new top 5. 2 things of note. LSU, I think, is really starting to figure things out defensively, and they have the best quarterback in the SEC. They certainly have a top 5 quarterback in the country in Jaden Daniels. As long as Jaden Daniels is playing for LSU, they are going to be in every single game that the Tigers are playing in this year. Now, I know what's going to cause another point of concern, having them ranked ahead of Florida State, because I know what you're going to tell me in the comment section if you bother to comment down the comment section. These two teams have already played, and Florida State won convincingly. Okay. But if they were playing on a neutral field today, I would bet that LSU, if they're not favored at Vegas, I would argue that on a neutral site, I think LSU would be slightly favored over Florida State, because LSU hasn't really struggled since that Florida State game. I think they're starting to really figure things out, and I could see them beating Alabama and taking that SEC West crown and competing for an SEC championship ultimately. Ohio State and Penn State played each other. Ohio State did end up winning that game, but it didn't really change my opinion on either team. We expected it to be that one possession game. We weren't 100% sure if Ohio State was going to cover, even though I did say Ohio State was going to win the game. My opinion didn't really change for both teams. I think these two teams are really damn good. But Michigan, they're dealing with some things. We'll see what happens at what the NCAA does end up deciding to do. But in the meantime, Michigan's still playing some really good ball. I do have them as my number 1 team in the country now. Not that I wasn't impressed with Ohio State or Penn State. They were in my top 2 last week. But Michigan went on the road in for a night game. It's a rivalry game as well. And so when you have all those ingredients, weird things can happen, is what I'm trying to say. And Michigan was able to block out that noise, because it's a major distraction, those NCAA allegations. That could be a major distraction that could break a vast majority of programs in the country if it was brought upon them against their respective programs. Michigan, we haven't seen them lose that focus yet. They took it personally, and they just drug rug Michigan State. They performed well above expectations. They're like a 25-point favorite, ended up winning by damn near 50. So that playing that well above expectations is what drove Michigan to this number 1 spot. They're going to be on bye this week, and then next couple of weeks, they'll get into the toughest part of their schedule. Penn State, Ohio State, still a lot to sort out in that Big Ten East. But yeah, that is my top 25 power ratings here in week number 9. Let me know how you guys feel about it down in the comments section. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Or do I have a very base take? Just let me know down in that comment section. Love to hear your thoughts. Speaking of some hot takes, I mean, we talked about Kansas State, and I told you that we were going to talk about Kansas State later on tonight. I thought about talking about Kansas State a little bit later, but since we just had the power ratings reveal and we saw Kansas State in there, let's just go ahead and dive right into it. We're going to dive in like Trey Songz. I'm going to dive in. Kansas State, we seen them boys. They were at home and they were taking on a TCU team. A TCU team that was coming off of a pretty impressive win, actually. TCU broke their 2-game losing streak. They blew out BYU by 30 plus. Their quarterback for TCU ended up getting Josh Hoover. Josh Hoover for TCU had an impressive performance. I believe he was like Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week in their conference. And he came down to earth very, very quickly. He was making his second career start against his Kansas State team. First start on the road for that young man playing quarterback for TCU. And it went horribly wrong. It went completely, absolutely wrong. Anything that could have went wrong for TCU, it went wrong for TCU. And for Kansas State, anything that Kansas State wanted to do, Kansas State was able to get it done. I mean, first and foremost, Kansas State, right out the gate, they started off red hot. They were red hot in this game. Starting off a 21-point outburst in the first quarter, built a significant gap between them and TCU. And then, after that, just never looked back. They never left their foot off the gas pedal just in that first quarter alone. Now, this is a key stat here in this Kansas State and TCU game. This is what really shocked me. Not that Kansas State won, but the way that they won. In the first quarter alone, this is one quarter of football. They had over 230 total yards on offense. That includes over 120 yards on the ground. And then, and then the whole game in general, Kansas State ended up churning out over 500 yards of offense. Also took really good care of the football. They did not turn the football over. They had 29 first downs, boys. 29 first downs. That is how you have yourself some ball control when you're constantly moving those chains. And oh boy, did they move those chains quite a bit with those 29 first downs. They were able to dominate that time of possession as well. Kansas State nearly had 40 minutes of the ball in their hands. TCU, on the other hand, hardly had it for 21 minutes. And when they did have it for those 21 minutes, oh boy, they were not very good with it. So what else happened in this game? Kansas State, they had their two quarterback system. They had Will Howard play for quite some time, but Will Howard was not the only quarterback that played for Kansas State, and it wasn't one of those things where, okay, it was a blowout. Let's see what we have in our younger players / our backups so that they can get valuable game experience for the future. Nah, it was not like that at all. Both quarterbacks for Kansas State that came into the game came in for meaningful playing time when the game was actually not completely in hand, right? So Will Howard, he's been starting for this Kansas State team throughout the course of his year, and he was solid. He's not a liquid or a gas by any means. 10 for 16, 154, 3 touchdowns. Also has 62 yards at the ground. He started the game, but then they also used his freshman quarterback, Avery Johnson, the freshman out of Wichita, Kansas, and he wasn't too bad either. He certainly provided them a little bit of a spark there. That's a big reason why they were able to win convincingly against Texas Tech. He's earned playing time, even as a freshman. 5 for 10, 90 yards and a touchdown. Also, he carried the rock quite a bit, and TCU, quite honestly, didn't really have an answer either. 73 yards on the ground. That's pretty good from their quarterback. So between Avery Johnson and Will Howard, they had over 100 yards on the ground. That's getting it done in terms of being dual threat quarterbacks. When both quarterbacks that come into the game end up being extraordinarily effective and also being extraordinarily effective with that ground game. They were both dual threats, and TCU was completely lost on defense, and they just never really were able to get things going on either side of the ball. And speaking of that other side of the ball, let's go back to Josh Hoover. Josh Hoover came back to earth. Josh Hoover, the quarterback for TCU, he had an excellent game last week against BYU, threw for over 400 yards. We talked about it on this podcast last week. We talked about TCU being a surprise in a pleasant way when they blew out BYU. They're not feeling the same way this week. Hoover barely completed half of his passes. He threw an interception, and the Horned Frogs, they were held to just like 300 yards of offense. It was their lowest total that they had the entire season. And it was surprising in the sense because TCU offensively has been a very explosive unit. TCU came into this game averaging over 400 yards. They're actually, close to 500 yards per contest through the first 7 games. Their unit just struggled to generate much momentum. And it wasn't even just on it was on all downs. First down, second down, third down. It was all bad. It was all dumpster fire. For example, Horned Frogs went just 2 for 13 on third down. So when they were brought in third down situations, Kansas State's defense was doing an effective job of getting them on the field. Not to mention that defense was getting hit hard early and often. No answers for that two quarterback mix that Kansas State is starting to employ. Amani Bailey was a bright spot in this game for TCU. He did rush for over 100 yards, and it's his fifth career 100-yard game. He accounted for the vast majority of their rushing yards because TCU only had like 113 yards on the ground. Best drive for TCU was when the game was completely out of hand. They ended up with 16 plays, 73-yard drive, and that didn't even lead to any points because the clock expired before they could get across the end zone. So, yeah, hate to see it. And I'm sure it also helps that Kansas State's able to enjoy some nice home cooking at the same time soon. Because this is the first time in almost a month that Kansas State actually had an opportunity to be at home. Their last home game before this was against UCF, a game in which they won, and then between byes and being on a 2-game road trip, they were on the road against Oklahoma State and Texas Tech as well. Those two teams, it's been a while, is what I'm trying to say. So they probably do enjoy being back. And I just think that TCU, I just don't think they're a team I don't think they're a good road team at all. And that's evident. This is just the second time this season that TCU has left the state of Texas. They only have one more game outside of Texas this year. That is when they go to Oklahoma for their regular season finale. So what's next for these two teams in particular? So TCU, they're going to take on Texas Tech in Lubbock, but they will have a bye. So we'll have a couple weeks to prepare for that Texas Tech game. They do have a 4-game winning streak over the Red Raiders. Can they maintain that? Can they find a way to win on the road? Because in their road games, they're just 1-2 thus far this season. It's been a struggle for them. They've lost their last 2 road games in conference play specifically. Can they get their first such road win in Big 12 action? We'll see if TCU can right the ship. But keep in mind, Texas Tech is also going to be on bye. So TCU may have a couple of weeks to get ready for Texas Tech, but Texas Tech, likewise, they are going to have a couple of weeks to get ready for TCU too. So don't know if that's much of an advantage for TCU other than just trying to get healthier and getting guys less banged up. Kansas State, on the other hand, they're actually playing this week. They're actually playing this weekend. They're taking on Houston. Houston, a newcomer to the Big 12, and it's actually the very first time that these two teams played on a football field against each other. So history being made for those two teams facing against each other for the first time in their respective programs. Wishing both teams the best and getting that early 1-0 series lead against the other team. But Kansas State riding hot right now, but Houston is no slouch either, even though they're 1-3 in conference play. They just took Texas to the brink just this past weekend. Should be an interesting game. But speaking of that state of Texas, that was not the only shocker in terms of teams that were actually playing in the state of Texas. So one of the rules, some of that my mama always told me when I was just a kid growing up is you don't play with your food. Food is supposed to provide substance for your body so that you can be a big, strong, healthy young man, right? So it's a golden rule to my mama. It really is. And you know what happened in the American Conference? Would y'all like to know what happened? Tulsa forgot about that rule that my mama told me. Tulsa played with food. You know why Tulsa played with food? Because Tulsa was playing rice. In Tulsa, they were favored against Rice. But nobody told Rice that. I can tell you that right now. Rice beat Tulsa. But that's not the most shocking part. Rice dominated Tulsa. Imagine being a favorite at home and then proceed to get blown out at home. Who would have thought? And that's what makes college football so crazy. That, when you're, listen, the transfer portal, NIL, and the extra year that was created because of the COVID season that we had. We do have some players that are starting in their mid-20s, like upwards of like 25, 26 years old, that are still playing college football. But the majority of this sport of college football is played by 18 to 22 years old. That is 90 to 95% of college athletes at the Division I level. And they're still young men that are trying to, learn and grow and develop, not only as football players, but as men. And sometimes when you have young people are going to be a little bit more, not less consistent, but they're going to be, there's more volatility. And this is a classic case of that. Rice beats Tulsa 42-10. This was a game where the model actually did think that Tulsa was going to cover, not by more than one score, but, there was some confidence in that Tulsa was going to cover. The model was completely wrong here. Sometimes I like to say that, sometimes, other people get into the way of our correct predictions, our sound judgment. This was not the case here. The model and I were wrong about this Rice and Tulsa game. Rice wins 42-10. And Rice silently putting themselves in a position where maybe they can compete for an American Conference Championship game. Possibly in their first year in the American Athletic Conference. Rice is right up in there. And the way that Rice schedule is shaping up, 3 of their last 5 games are all against teams that are currently undefeated. There's a freeway tie for first place right now. Tulane, SMU, and UTSA. Rice plays all 3 of them. So if Rice finds a way to win at least 2 of these next 3 games, Rice could mess around and go to the American Athletic Championship game in their first year of the conference. Who would have thought? Who would have thunk it, Absolutely crazy times that we're living in right now. Going to the game specifically, though. You guys remember JT Daniels, former quarterback of USC and Georgia, and in his last season was the quarterback for West Virginia? He's here. JT Daniels is at his 4th stop. He's in his 6th year of college football. And he's quietly putting together an excellent season at the group of 5 level. He's now thrown for over 2,000 yards, 17 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Might I add, also has Rice playing pretty well, winning 4 of their last 6 games ever since that loss to Texas as well. And I mean, Rice, and it's not just JT Daniels specifically. I mean, JT Daniels, he had a good game, threw for 2 touchdowns, ran for another touchdown as well, but he's got some help. This is a solid group of 5 team. Dean Connors, for example, is on the squad. He runs all over Tulsa, 120 and 3 touchdowns on the ground. The defense gets off to an extremely fast start as well. And Tulsa has a somewhat dangerous offense themselves. So it was a huge surprise to see Tulsa shut down like this, especially in the second half. They could not figure out anything in the second half. The Tulsa Golden Hurricanes at home were shut out completely in the second half. But there was certainly some keys in this game. Rice, even though they went 3 and out on the opening drive, one of their defenders, Gabriel Taylor, was able to intercept Braylon Baxton. who Braylon Braxton is going to have a bright future. We're high on Braylon Braxton for sure. But he he didn't look very good in this game. He got intercepted the very first pass. Rice was able to use that to get into the end zone, took advantage of the short field, the somewhat short field, I should say. And after that, it was just off to the races, man. Completely off to the races here. After that interception, I mean, Rice just never looked back. Not the only turnover that the Rice defense was able to force, by the way. Jabraylon Carroll was able to recover a fumble as well. Also getting a turnover off Braxton. It was a bad day for Braylon Braxton. He was straight up not having a good time. Turned into a short field. And before you know it, Rice was already up 14-0. The food was fighting back. Not to mention, we also have Keenan Benjamin catching a 30-yard touchdown. Well, actually, that's one of the bright spots for Tulsa. Yeah, it was a good win for Rice. We're really excited about the Rice Owls. And we talked about Rice's schedule. So what happens with Rice? We'll talk about winners first. Like I said, they put themselves in a good position to at least be in that dark horse conversation in terms of being competitive in the American Conference, trying to sneak their way into the American Conference Championship. They'll have an opportunity to play against the best. They have Tulane at home. Tulane, one of the best group of 5 teams in the country, 6-1. I actually think Tulane probably should be ranked higher than number 22 in the country because the only loss that they had was to Ole Miss, and that was when Michael Pratt wasn't playing. Michael Pratt is now playing, and he has their offense playing at a high level. Should be a high-scoring game next weekend. That's a 4:00 kickoff on ESPN2. If one of the top 25 matchups, either like Oregon, Utah, or Duke and Louisville, one of those 2 games like gets completely out of hand, and you care about American Conference football, definitely keep an eye on this one. That could have some implications. They also have SMU at home right after, and then they have UTSA. They go on the road to play against UTSA. It's a former Conference USA matchup, now an American Conference matchup, and then they close out their season against other former Conference USA opponents, Charlotte, Florida Atlantic. It's a very navigable schedule in the sense where I could certainly see Rice qualify for a bowl, get the 6 wins at the very least. I think they would be favored against Charlotte for sure. Charlotte has been difficult to watch, to be nice. And then that home game against Florida Atlantic, with them being at home, I can also see Rice being slightly favored, depending on what happens towards the end of the season here. And because of that, Rice could get to a bowl game. And I mean, that'd be a good season for Rice, being represented in bowl season with a number of bowl games out there. As long as you get the 6 wins, you're going to be fine. You're going to be A-okay. So Rice in a good spot to get to a bowl game. Now for Tulsa. Tulsa, on the other hand, they're now under 500, 3-4. And that schedule is not going to get easier. They do have 2 road games over the course of the next 3 weeks. They go play SMU on the road. They're on a 2-game losing streak, too. They do have a home game against Charlotte, but then they have a road game against Tulane. For Tulsa, they got to find a way to win 3 games. So presuming SMU and Tulane are going to be chalked up as losses. You got to beat Charlotte, you got to beat North Texas, and you got to beat Eastern Carolina in order for Tulsa to go bowling. Certainly possible. I think they are capable of doing it. Eastern Carolina, really rough to watch, to say the least. But certainly doable. Both of these teams are still more than capable of making it to a bowl game. Rice in a better spot. We'll see what Rice does in these next 3 weeks here as they navigate the hardest part of their conference schedule. And if they can win at least 2 of their next 3 games, or shoot, maybe they win all 3 games. Maybe they somehow beat Tulane, beat SMU, beat UTSA. Then all of a sudden, Rice could be a virtual lock to get into the conference championship because then they would have tiebreakers over all those three teams, and they were also able to avoid Memphis too. So keep an eye on Rice. You certainly is not a team to play with your food with. Maybe not the best team in the American, but they'll certainly be able to prove that on the field in the next few weeks, seeing as they will be playing against the best of the American over the course of these next few weekends. So one more game that I wanted to talk about, and I promise we will be getting out of the state of Texas for this one. I did want to talk about one of the best conferences real quick, at least at the group of 5 level. We are now jumping in to that Sun Belt, and the Sun Belt has certainly been an interesting place. There's been a lot of good teams in the Sun Belt, most notably James Madison, who's just been ranked in the top 25 by the AP. It's much deserved for James Madison. We're not going to talk about James Madison specifically for this game. That surprises me the most, though. We're actually going to dive into another team that James Madison did play this year and beat, and that's this Southern Alabama team. And this Southern Alabama team, listen, they might have been forgotten about. They were considered like one of the best group of 5 teams. Then we saw them lose to Tulane on the road pretty convincingly. Also, dropping a game against Central Michigan. It wasn't overall, it wasn't a positive non-conference slate. Aside from winning on the road against Oklahoma State, and with each passing day, that win is looking better and better, given how much better Oklahoma State has looked, by the way. Shout out to the Jaguars getting a sneaky good win. Dominant win, 33-7. But here we are, deep in the Sun Belt Conference play, though. Last week, they were on the road against Louisiana Monroe, and they won 55-7. We actually talked about this Southern Alabama team last week because it was considered one of the bigger surprises of the college football weekend, what Southern Alabama was able to do against Louisiana Monroe. And South Alabama's just keeping the focus. They are just chugging along. They're not really caring what anybody's thinking. They blow out Southern Miss. They blow out Southern Miss by 50+. USA was only an 18.5-point favorite when this line closed. Over-under was at 51. And South Alabama topped that all by themselves. So what happened in this game? First of all, with Damian Webb, he was a huge spark for South Alabama to get things started. 20 carries, 102 yards, which doesn't sound that impressive, but he found the end zone 4 times. He accounted for more than half of the rushing touchdowns that South Alabama did end up having in this game. They ended up having 7 touchdowns total, had a couple of field goals thrown in there as well. But Damian Webb accounted for more than half of them. He knows how to find the end zone. Well, Damian is certified him, that's for sure. South Alabama, in addition, second week in a row, they set program records for margin of victory. So that 55-7 win that we were just talking about, that was a program record for their biggest win from a point margin standpoint as a Division I program. And South Alabama has not been at the Division I level for quite for a while. Matter of fact, they've been at the FBS level for a decade, if that. So South Alabama has not been around for a very long time. They're so new of a program. The only time that you could find South Alabama in the game is NCAA 14. You will not find them in any other NCAA game unless you create the team. That's how new this program is. And they also set that program record for largest margin of victory, 55-7. And then they end up expanding on that record yet again, pushing it to over 50 points of victory. 52 points is a program record for their largest win ever as a D1 program. So arguably the best game South Alabama has played in school history. And how they were able to accomplish that, they had 34 first downs on that fateful Tuesday night. So this game happened last Tuesday, and that's how impressive the win was if we're still talking about it a week later. Incredible. Absolutely incredible stuff by South Alabama. Now, Southern Miss, on the other hand, I mean, they set a program record too, but they said it in a negative way. Southern Miss ended up with its worst conference loss in program history, and they are now riding a 6-game losing streak right now. So they opened the season with a win against Alcorn State, against FCS school, HBCU, by the way. But after that, they have been on a 6-game losing streak. Big reason for their losing streak is that they really have not put it together as a team. Like, there have been times where the offense has played well enough to win, but then their defense lets them down. And there's been times this year where the defense has played well enough to win, but offensively they couldn't get enough going in order to ultimately win the football game. So Southern Miss, they've had winnable efforts, but they haven't put it together to beat a team that's actually FBS level. But their offense has really let them down. It's been really rough to watch Southern Miss play offense in the past couple of weeks. They actually have not scored an offensive touchdown since their 50-36 loss to Texas State. That was on September 30th. So it's been a month. It's been a month since Southern Miss has scored an offensive touchdown. So that's a big reason as well why they weren't able to win this game. Aside from the fact that they gave up anything and everything as well, South Alabama ended up with over 640 yards of total offense. Southern Miss just had 150. And that 150 number sounds bad until you found out that the vast majority of those yards actually came on the final drive of the game. The game was out of hand, and I'm sure that South Alabama had their backups in at this point. 65 of those yards, 65 of the 150, came on that final drive. And it doesn't even end in points. It ends up in a fumble on South Alabama's 29-yard line. Other stats of note, South Alabama did end up winning the turnover battle. South Alabama did turn the ball over once. USM turned the ball over a couple of times. Time of possession was actually pretty similar, which is crazy given how lopsided the score is. So South Alabama won the time possession battle, but it wasn't a significant win. South Alabama with a little over 31 minutes of time possession. Southern Miss, less than 29. Ended up with 28 minutes and 45 seconds as your final time of possession count. So what's next for both teams? We'll go to the winners first because everyone loves a winner, right? South Alabama continues their conference play. They are tied for first place in that Western Division. That's why this game is a little bit important, because Southern Miss is in this division as well. So when you have divisions, beating your divisional opponents is a must if you want to go to the conference championship game at the end of the season. This Western Division is probably just a touch weaker than the East side. South Alabama is on the West side. They play Louisiana. They take on the Raging Cajuns on Saturday. It'll be considered a little bit of a tune-up before they play at least one of the games, because South Alabama's tied with Troy. They're tied for Texas with Texas State at the top of the Western Division. One of the games that South Alabama will have that will decide who represents the West Division in that Sun Belt Conference Championship game is when they go on the road against Troy in a couple of weeks. We like South Alabama against Louisiana, but they got to be really careful about not looking past them, because if South Alabama drops this game against Louisiana, they're going to put themselves in an 8-ball position to get to the that Sun Belt Conference Championship game. And we believed that this team is capable of winning the Sun Belt. We actually picked them to win the Sun Belt at the beginning of the year. If James Madison didn't have to deal with those archaic rules with the NCAA, we would have picked James Madison. But it is what it is at this point. We'll see what the mental focus is for Louisiana. That's going to tell us a lot about how serious of a contender South Alabama is for the Sun Belt. And then as for Southern Miss, I mean, for Southern Miss, I think at this point you're just really trying your best to kind of see what you have in your younger guys. This seems like it's a pretty lost season at this point, and that's even with the fact that they have Frank Gore Jr. Coming back, but that offensive line for Southern Miss has really not blocked very well for Frank Gore Jr. More than halfway through the year, and the son of Frank Gore has less than 500 yards rushing. This was a very dynamic runner last season, a season in which he ran for almost 1,400 yards. So the team around him is letting Frank Gore down tremendously. But I think at this point of the year, I think it's going to be important for Southern Miss to really prioritize just seeing what they have in the younger players on this team, kind of treat this as an evaluation period. This is not a team that's going bowling. I don't really see them going bowling. They actually only have a couple of home games left. One's against fellow bottom dweller UL Monroe. Maybe they'll be able to win that game. Maybe not. It might be pretty close. We'll have to see what the model says when those two teams do meet up in a couple of weeks. But they got to go play Troy. They got to go take on an SEC school in Mississippi State as well. Southern Miss, how much fight do they have? And are they going to use this time here in the second half of the season to evaluate who is going to be a building block for next year? And then go from there in terms of who they need to recruit, who they need to go into the transfer portal, because Southern Miss is one of the worst teams in the country right now. And they got some work to do if they ever want to be competitive in the Sun Belt. A really good Sun Belt conference, might I add. I think this is it's either them or the Mountain West is the best group of 5 conference in all of college football. A lot of tough questions that really do need to be asked at Southern Miss right now. But that does cover the biggest surprises that I had over the course of week number 8. And hopefully you did certainly enjoy that. Let's go ahead. Last thing that I did have in this podcast before we go ahead and get ourselves up out of here. Let's jump in to Best Bets. That 4-for-4 special. And this is not presented by FanDuel. FanDuel doesn't sponsor us, but these lines are off of FanDuel. And listen, we had a pretty good week last week. We ended up going 3-for-4. The only best bet that we did end up not being accurate on was when we were picking the the Ohio State and Penn State game. We thought that was going to be a game where we were going to see a little bit more scoring than what we anticipated, and actually was a little bit more of a defensive-minded game than what we thought we were going to see. So that over for 45.5 did not cash, but the other 3 we were successful with. SMU, maybe a revival of the Pony Express. They're looking real good. Last year in the American, by the way, they're going to the ACC, will be considered a Power 5 school. It's going to be weird to say for SMU, but they're ever since suffering that death penalty in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe we're seeing a resurgence of SMU football again, dare I say it. But they did cash at 20.5. South Alabama minus 17.5. We talked about them earlier. They did cover that. And then New Mexico State and Utah, we called the under at 49.5. So we are 3-for-4. But, 3-for-4 is certainly not bad. It's going to win us some money, at least over the course of that week. We still want to shoot for the 4-for-4. So how do we get there? How do we end up making that happen? We got a brand new slate. We got a brand new sheet of music to work off of. And to start things off, I'm only going to have one for tonight because the other bets that I'm looking at, they're all on Saturday. So when we have that second podcast later on this week, we will dive into that. We got Florida Atlantic -4.5. They're on the road against Charlotte. Charlotte just won their very first game against an FBS team this year. So they've finally got a win against an FBS squad. Good for Charlotte. Here's the thing. Florida Atlantic is going to be a little bit of wounded animal mode, given how they were embarrassed against UTSA. I do think that Florida Atlantic is a solid team. I don't feel the same way for Charlotte. The model really does love Florida Atlantic in this wounded animal spot. So I think this is a good get-right game for the Owls. And we're going to go ahead and see them win against Charlotte on the road. And I think they also cover somewhat comfortably against Charlotte on the road as well. We actually really liked this when it was at 5.5. That was the opening line. So honestly, we love it even more now that it's just at 4.5. So we're gonna jump into that before maybe people realize what's up and that line shoots up a little bit more as we get closer to the game. But we really do love Florida Atlantic at 4.5. Man, we are starting to run out of voice, but I really do hope that you enjoyed today's pod. It's really good. Always love talking about, like the group of five. Anytime that we can squeeze that in, we're certainly gonna do it. We're not afraid to talk about it over here. But when we come back on later this week, it'll probably, if everything goes according to plan, we'll had that second podcast drop on a Friday night kind of deal. So if it goes according to plan, either Friday night or like early Saturday morning, you should expect the next podcast. We're gonna talk about some top 25 games. We're certainly gonna do that, and also some non-top 25 games that are of interest that could shake up the top 25 polls a little bit when the dust settles, including another group of five game out in the West Coast that maybe not a lot of people are talking about outside of the that mountain time zone. So lots of games that we're going to cover in the next podcast. I'm really excited to dive into that, but I'm going to save it for next time. And then also in the next podcast, we're going to have the rest of the best bets. So you're going to want to definitely check that out so that I can help you win some money. Because when I win money, you win money. We doing good. Everyone likes a winner. So that being said, I'm going to sign off for tonight. The voice is starting to get a little tired on me, getting close to my bedtime. We were recording this a little bit later in the evening than what we usually do, but we're chilling at about an hour. Not a bad length at all. Everyone likes some good length. Pause. I'm your host, Jake. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you haven't done so already, but you made it all the way to the end of this video, you are a real MVP because of that. Hit that like button for me. I would truly appreciate that from the very bottom of my heart. And then hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new. We're a very new channel here on the YouTube platform. So because we are a very new channel here on the platform, you have a real opportunity to really be that A1 since day one. So I would truly appreciate that if you hit that subscribe button. We could build our very own college football community that we can all love and appreciate this beautiful game together. But I am your host, Jake. I am going to sign off for tonight. Hope you guys are all out there. Hope you're having a good one. Take care, everybody.